But to take them as anything else, I don't see how you can do that, honestly. I should also mention, by the way, that my stake's in the ground. My theological stake is in the ground. I'll just expose to you my bias right now. In the statement, Jesus is Lord. That's where I'm at. So if Jesus says do something, I'm going to do it. Okay, so somebody mentioned to me, well, what are you going to do if Jesus comes back and commands you to fight in his army in Revelation 19? I say, I'll do whatever he says. He's the Lord. That's what Lord means. You know what I mean? So that's where my theological stake is planted. So if you can show me that Jesus said something different, I'd be interested in that during the question time. So there's this guy named Walter Wink. He's a professor, and he used to be at Union. Now he's somewhere else in New York City. And he has really done a lot of cultural work on these 3 examples Jesus gave. Isn't it great that he gave us examples? So he didn't just leave us with don't resist an evil person and take off and go on to the next. He gave us 3 examples. So these examples, I take it, are explanatory to help us understand his statement. The first example is whoever strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the left also. Dustin, could I have you come forward as our model? It's important to note that about this time, roughly 3%, a vast minority of the people were extremely wealthy. And then there were 2 other classes, poor and dirt poor. So, and then I guess I learned a new class today where the dirt is richer than you. I never heard that before. That's great. But the idea is that in their society there was a vast difference between the haves and the have-nots. And in all likelihood, the people standing there at the Sermon on the Mount are the peasants. They're the people that don't have the money. And so this was something that would happen in their society. Somebody would strike you on the cheek, and it was, as we'll see, a way to humiliate somebody. So I chose Dustin to be our example for this. But when we first read the statement, strike you on the right cheek, you're probably thinking a right hook, which would be like this, right? Now, which cheek is that of yours, Dustin?
That's my left cheek.
That's his left cheek, right? So you think, okay, it must be a left hook. That would hit his right cheek, right? But the left hand was only used for unseemly purposes in their culture. And to even gesture with it, according to Walter Wink, now he's studied this stuff, I haven't, but according to him, to even gesture with the left hand would bring shame on yourself, okay, in their culture at that time. So how am I going to hit this cheek with this hand?
Backhand.
I'm going to have to backhand him, right? And so when I...
He's not taking pictures.
Evidence. He's not non-violent after all. Finnegan, I've got evidence of him beating up Dustin. Stay just a while longer.
Can I help you with this?
Can you hold him? But so the idea is that a backhand is not used to inflict harm. Yeah, it would hurt, obviously, but it's not the sort of thing that you're using to kill somebody or beat somebody severely. It's used as a way to humiliate somebody, to put them in their place. It's always from one step down. So for example, it would be from a Roman to a Jew, from a Jewish landowner to a Jewish peasant, from a master to a slave, from a parent to a child, but it would not be between equals. And their society was extremely stratified. You have a hierarchy where everybody knows their place. And the whole society works based on honor and shame, as Dustin had mentioned before. So to do this to somebody would be saying, you need to get in your place. It would be a way of me dominating him, not literally beating him up. They would use a whip for that, to flog them.
Can we get you one?
But what does Jesus say? What does Jesus say? Turn the other cheek. So let me slap him. Now turn the other cheek. There you go. So now, turn sideways so you can all see how you turn the cheek. Now what's in the way? His teeth and his nose and his forehead. All the parts of his face that probably wouldn't feel too good on my hand to hit, right? So he's turned the cheek. I don't want to backhand him again, but boy, look at that target. Look at that big, fat left cheek, that just is inviting me for a right hook, isn't it? Right there. Thank you. You can sit down. That was great. This is according to Walter Wink, quoting him. By turning the other cheek, the person struck puts the striker in an untenable spot. He cannot repeat the backhand because the other's nose is now in the way. I guess he could if he really wanted to. The left cheek makes a fine target, but only persons who are equals fight with fists. And the last thing the master wants is for the slave to assert equality. This, of course, is no way to avoid trouble. The master might have the slave flogged to it within an inch of her life, but the point has been irrevocably made. The inferior is saying in no uncertain terms, I won't take such treatment anymore. I am your equal. I am a child of God. So that puts the person who's abusing the other person in a spot where they have to choose between two things. One is stop, don't hit them again. And the other idea is got to hit them as an equal. Either way, it's better than what it was. I imagine the common response to getting slapped like that in their society was just to boil inside in shame and contempt for this evil person who's hitting you. Don't you think that was the normal response in their culture? It's not like you could take them to the court. When the rich have the courts in their pockets, and you're one of the poor people, what are you going to do? Jesus is giving them a way to confront this evil system non-violently, or maybe not system, but to confront this evil act non-violently. Okay, let's go to the next one. If anyone wants to sue you for your coat, let him have your tunic also. In the Luke version, it says if somebody wants to sue you for your tunic, give them your coat also. It works either way. But here's the way that I thought about this when I first read it. I thought to myself, all right, I've got about 8 shirts, just here alone. Now, I'm going to Florida next, so it's not just for these 3 days, all right, guys? Cut me a break here. But in our society, clothing's mass-produced. If somebody sued me for one of my 20 shirts, I'd give them one of my 3 or 4 coats. Big deal, right? Not in their society. Not if you were poor. In their society, there were 2 main garments. You'd have your tunic, which was worn next to the skin, a full-length garment. And then you'd have your coat, which would go over top if it's cold out, just like coats are today. But think more like a robe than you think of just like our coats that only cut off at the waist or something like that. And so, if somebody was really poor, they would even sleep in their coat. That would double as their blanket. And the Old Testament said you're not allowed to take that away from somebody. You have to give it back to them each night so that they don't pray against you, and that would be bad because God listens to the prayer of the oppressed. So Jesus says, we'll get to what Jesus says in just a second. So if someone had no land, no crops, no other way to pay his debt, he could be sued for the clothes off his back. We're talking about someone who has suffered misfortune after misfortune. He has nothing left. He has succumbed to the economic squeeze of Romanization. And so, what does Jesus say? Give them your last garment. So somebody sued you for everything and they stop just short of stripping you naked. Jesus says, give them the last thing too. Okay, let's play this out. If you only have 2 garments and you're in court and they've just taken one, and you give them the last one, what's the implication here? You're going to be naked in court.
Dustin?
Is that a Velcro suit you've got on? You can just write that on. It's great having you here, Carl. Stand-up comedian thing. All right, this is Walter Wink again. Nakedness was taboo in Judaism. Well, it's taboo in here too, right? I mean, would any of you be uncomfortable if I was standing here completely naked? Right? I would be. Nakedness remains a taboo thing in almost every society. But nakedness was really taboo in Judaism. And shame fell less on the naked party than on the person viewing or causing the nakedness. By stripping, the debtor has brought the creditor under the same prohibition that led to the curse of Canaan. Remember that when Noah got off the ark and Ham, uncovering the nakedness and saw his nakedness and all that? This is the same thing that caused the curse of Canaan that is being put on this other person by the stripping. And much as Isaiah had walked naked and barefoot for 3 years. You guys ever read that and be like, what? As a prophetic sign. So the debtor parades his nakedness in prophetic protest against a system that has deliberately rendered him destitute. I'm skipping down a sentence or two. The entire system by which debtors are oppressed has been publicly unmasked. The creditor is revealed to be not a legitimate money lender, but a party to the reduction of an entire social class to landlessness, destitution, and abasement. Especially during the time of Jesus. Herod Antipas was really taxing the people heavily. He was building, Cephas was already built, but he was building on the sea there. Was it Tiberias on the sea? And he was really trying to make the land produce to impress Caesar. It was a heavy load on the people. This unmasking is not simply punitive, therefore, it offers the creditor a chance to see, perhaps for the first time in his life, what his practices cause and to repent. The person is confronting the unjust system by doing this act that Jesus tells him. All right, let's go to the last one. Whoever forces you to go 1 mile, go with him 2. Now, Romans were hated in their society. I mean, the Jewish people considered their land, and some of them still consider their land, the Holy Land, right? Back in the time when Jesus was walking this earth, there was a serious resentment to an occupying foreign Gentile force, as you might imagine. I mean, just imagine if the Chinese took over the United States and you had soldiers walking around. How would you feel about those soldiers? Especially if you believe that this was God's country that He promised to our ancestors and so on. And you would be really stiff, upset about that. And so there was this whole controversy about taxes. AD 6, there was a whole huge thing that happened with Judas the Galilean. AD 66, you had the revolution that ended in the destruction of the temple in 70, and so on. And so this was a controversial subject that Jesus is stepping his toes onto, right? He's saying, if somebody wants you to go 1 mile. This is the practice called angeria. It's a typical thing that happened throughout the Roman Empire where a soldier would compel or force a peasant to carry his pack. The pack would be 65 to 85 pounds. Now, just imagine what your average Jew would feel about this situation. You have a Roman soldier come to your town marching through, and he gets you. Maybe you saw him, you tried to get away, or I've got something to do. Trying to get out of there, right? But somehow he's cornered you in, and he said, "Carry my pack." He's got his sword there, and maybe there's other soldiers around or whatever. So you regretfully take the pack onto your back, and you start walking. And it's heavy. It could be as much as 80 pounds. And the shame you would feel, the redness of your face. You've been made a donkey to carry the load of Rome's, this Gentile dog nation, to carry their military gear. You're aiding the Roman army. I mean, how would you feel as you had to carry this thing? And it's not like it was an option. And so I imagine that your average Jewish peasant got to the first milestone, dropped that pack like there was no tomorrow, kicked up some dust, spit on the ground, cursed in Aramaic, and ran home. Or something like that, right? He wasn't going to stay around and be like, "So, you want to do lunch?" You know what I mean? We're talking about people that are oppressed and that have serious resentment for good reasons. And so Jesus says something absolutely absurd. It's the most ridiculous thing in the world. He says, "Go with him 2 miles." What? Excuse me, Jesus. Are you a Roman sympathizer? Are you saying that we should help the Romans to stay in power over us? Are you crazy? But there was another law, another half to the Angeria law. The first half was, if a Roman soldier forced you, you had to go for 1 mile. The second half was, he's not allowed to go more than 1 mile. At 1 mile, that's where it cut off. This practice had been abused. We have some documents from Egypt that talk about this, how the soldiers were abusing this practice. It was already a hated practice, and they were cracking down on it. And they said, only 1 mile. And you didn't know what the punishment might be. The centurion might give you barley rations instead of wheat, or he may make you stand all day in front of his tent, barefoot holding a clod of dirt. Or he may have you flogged or arrested. The soldier just didn't know what kind of punishment would come if he got caught forcing a Jew to go more than 1 mile. But here's what would happen. Imagine this scene. The Jewish peasant is carrying the pack. He sees the 1 mile mark and he keeps going. The Roman soldier is suddenly mystified because nobody does that. I mean, nobody. Not in Syria, not in Egypt, not in Palestine. Come on. Nobody goes an inch more than 1 mile. Right? And he keeps walking. And so the soldier says, "Excuse me, I need to have my bag back." And the Jewish peasant says, "No, I'm going to carry it for a 2nd mile." And he keeps walking, right? Imagine this soldier. He's starting to get nervous now. "Give me back my bag. You can't take that a 2nd mile. No, I'm doing it anyhow." And he's running along there. And suddenly something interesting has happened. And this is what